I'm Patricia Izichi, and this is Proactive Empowered Careers, a space for thinking about careers differently, not as something separate from who you are, but as an expression of you and the life you want to live. Hello everyone, and welcome back. So last time we talked about possibility, that moment where you begin asking what else might be possible. And if you've been sitting with that question over the last week, you might have noticed something. Possibility is interesting, but it can also be overwhelming. Because as soon as we sense something might be possible, our mind tends to jump straight to, do I need to change my whole life? Is this a career move? Is this resignation? Is this a complete reinvention? And suddenly, curiosity turns into pressure. And the thing about pressure is that it tends to shut curiosity down. So today I want to talk about something much simpler than that. Experiments. Because the most meaningful change doesn't always begin with a life decision. It begins with an experiment. When we feel stuck or misaligned in our careers, we often assume the next move has to be big. A new job, a new direction, a qualification, a relocation, something decisive. But that thinking creates a problem because big decisions require certainty. And most of the time, when we're in this situation, certainty is exactly what we don't have. So you end up waiting until you're sure, or until you feel brave, or until you have a plan. And while you're waiting, nothing's happening, nothing moves. But experiments work differently. Experiments are small and contained. Experiments feel reversible. They're about information gathering. They're not a declaration. It's not an identity shift. It's not a dramatic announcement. It's simply you saying to yourself, let me try this and see what I learn. And an experiment might be having one honest conversation, or taking one short course, or exploring a project outside of your core role, or even adjusting your schedule slightly, or saying no where once you'd actually usually have said yes, or speaking up once in a meeting where you'd usually just stay quiet. It could be shadowing someone, researching something seriously instead of casually, applying for a role not because you need to leave, but because you want to see how it feels. None of these are life decisions. I like to think of them as snippets of information, data points. And those data points reduce fear. Because once you have that information, you're no longer imagining everything. You start responding to something real. Now, one of the biggest myths about change is that you need to know before you move. In reality, you often move in order to know. Not because action creates clarity on its own, but because some things only become clear once you've experienced them. And this is where it helps to make a distinction. Some clarity comes from space, from stepping back, from noticing, from giving yourself room to think and feel, the kinds of clarity we've been exploring in earlier episodes. But there's another kind of clarity as well, the kind that only comes once you start engaging with something, trying it, experiencing it, seeing how it actually feels in reality. Because experience produces a different kind of insight, not better, just different. And sometimes a small experiment can show you something that thinking alone couldn't ever get to. It moves things that can feel abstract into something that you can actually respond to in reality. And this is where agency returns. Not because you suddenly control everything, but because you're participating. You're shaping your experience, testing assumptions, engaging with your own life. And that feels very different from waiting. Now, experiments don't always confirm what we hoped. Sometimes you try something and realize, that's not it. And that's still useful because ruling something out increases clarity. Other times you try something and feel unexpectedly energized, or you feel nothing at all. And that also tells you something too. Because what experiments do is take something out of the realm of what if and bring it back into the realm of reality. And reality, even when it's not perfect, gives you something solid to respond to. It takes you out of your head and into your life. There's another important part to this to consider as well. When we think in terms of decisions, it can often feel quite loaded, like whatever we choose says something final about who we are or who we're becoming. If I do this, does that mean I'm this kind of person now? And that can create a lot of pressure, not just about the decision, but about what it means for your identity. But when you shift into thinking in terms of experiments, it feels completely different. You're not declaring anything. You're not deciding who you are forever. You're just exploring. And exploration lands so very differently in our systems than hard decisions. Exploration is lighter. It's less fixed. And it's less threatening. You're not trying to reinvent yourself. You're just gathering information about what fits, about what doesn't, and about who you might be becoming. And that creates a very different internal experience. It's far less activating in a way that makes it easier to actually move. Decisions can feel like defining who you are, whereas experiments can feel like discovering it. And I want to say something practical here. Experiments still take courage. They still involve a bit of discomfort, stepping slightly beyond what's familiar to you. But they don't need total certainty. They don't require burning bridges, and they don't mean you have to have everything figured out. They just ask for a bit of willingness to take a small step, to tolerate a bit of uncertainty, and to see what you learn. And all of that often feels so much more manageable. So if you've been sitting with possibility lately, instead of asking, what's my next big decision? You might try asking, what's one small experiment I could try? Not to change my whole life, just to gather information, to see how it feels, and to test the edges of what might be possible. Because change doesn't usually begin with certainty. It begins with participation. And experiments are one of the best ways you can participate. So next time, we're going to bring this arc together. Because once you've reflected, noticed, understood the environments around you and your ecosystems, recognized how you've adapted, allowed possibility, and started experimenting, something different starts to become clearer. You're not as powerless as you once felt. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. But for now, just consider this. Where could you experiment instead of decide? So until next time, take the very best care of yourselves. and see you next week. This has been Proactive Empowered Careers. If today's episode resonated, follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss what comes next. And if this podcast is supporting you, leaving a short review helps others find these conversations. And remember, your career isn't separate from who you are. It's an expression of you and the life you want to live.